The wind carried the scent of dust and dying hope through Barren Creek, Texas, in the autumn of 1878, the same year a boy named Patrick Morgan was found wrapped in a horse blanket inside the livery stable. No note, no name, nothing but a pair of gray eyes blinking up at the stable owner who nearly stepped on him in the dark. Old Ezra Coombs, the stable owner, was not a sentimental man, but even he could not leave a baby to die among the hay and horse dung. He took the child in, fed him on goat's milk, and raised him as best a bachelor livery owner could, which meant the boy grew up smelling of leather and manure, sleeping on a cot in the tack room, and learning to read from old newspapers used to line the stalls. By the time Patrick Morgan turned 22, he had grown into a broad-shouldered young man with calloused hands, a quiet way of speaking, and eyes that seemed to carry both the loneliness of his beginnings and a stubborn, unshakable kindness. Ezra had passed on 2 winters prior, leaving Patrick the stable and little else besides debts that seemed to multiply like rabbits every time the bank in Barren Creek sent a man around with papers to sign. The town itself had once thrived on cattle drives and the railroad spur that connected it to the larger markets in Fort Worth, but a series of droughts, a failed silver claim that had drained half the town's savings, and the recent arrival of a man named Silas Vance had brought Barren Creek to the edge of collapse. Vance had come from the east with slick suits and slicker promises, buying up mortgages and water rights until nearly every business in town owed him something, including the Callahan family's dry goods store. Delia Callahan had watched her father's health decline right alongside the fortunes of Barren Creek. She was 24 years old, with auburn hair she kept tucked beneath a plain bonnet more often than not, and hands that had grown rough from years of stocking shelves, keeping ledgers, and doing the work her father could no longer manage since his lungs had started failing him from the dust that seemed to hang perpetually in the Texas air. Her mother had died of fever when Delia was 16, leaving her to raise her younger brother Tommy, now 14, largely on her own while still helping run the store. It was a Tuesday morning in March of 1879 when Delia first truly noticed Patrick Morgan, though she had seen him around town for years, always at a distance, always working. She had come to the livery to arrange for her father's old mare to be reshod, and found Patrick kneeling beside a lathered horse that had come in lame from a rancher's spread outside of town, speaking to the animal in low, soothing tones as he worked a stone free from its hoof. "You have a gentle way with them," Delia said, surprising herself with the observation. Patrick looked up startled, then offered a small, crooked smile that seemed unpracticed, as though he did not often have cause to use it. "They do not lie to you, horses. Tell you exactly what is wrong if you take the time to listen." "I wish people were so simple," Delia replied, and something in the way she said it, weary and a touch bitter, made Patrick study her more closely. "Your father, he is not well, I hear." "No, he is not." Delia's chin lifted slightly, a gesture of pride covering worry. "But we manage." Patrick nodded, understanding more about managing and making do than most men his age. "The mare needs new shoes, you said." "Yes, if it is not too much trouble." "No trouble at all, Miss Callahan." He knew her name, of course. Everyone in a town of 600 knew everyone else's name, but hearing him say it, low and certain, sent an unexpected warmth through her chest that she quickly attributed to the morning sun. Over the following weeks, Delia found more reasons to visit the livery than her father's mare could reasonably justify. Sometimes it was to inquire about a delivery of feed for the store, other times simply to walk past on her way to the mercantile, hoping to catch a glimpse of Patrick at work, his shirt sleeves rolled up, sweat glistening on his forearms as he shod horses or repaired wagon wheels for the ranchers who still had money enough to pay him. Patrick, for his part, began finding excuses to visit the Callahan store, purchasing nails he did not need, rope he already had plenty of, simply for the chance to exchange a few words with Delia across the counter. He noticed the way she bit her lower lip when concentrating on the ledger books, The way her laugh, when he managed to earn one, transformed her whole face from careful composure into something bright and unguarded. It was during one such visit, in early April, that Delia's father, Michael Callahan, emerged from the back room, coughing into a handkerchief, his face pale and drawn beneath his gray beard. Patrick immediately set down the coil of rope he had been examining and moved to help the older man to a chair. "Mr. Callahan, sir, let me help you." Michael waved him off initially, pride warring with weakness, but eventually allowed Patrick to guide him into the chair behind the counter. "You are the stable boy," Michael said between labored breaths, studying Patrick's face. "Ezra's boy." "Yes, sir, Patrick Morgan. Ezra was a good man, fair with his prices, never cheated a soul in this town." Michael's eyes, though tired, held a sharpness that suggested his mind remained keen even as his body failed him. "You have his way about you, steady." "Thank you, sir." "Papa, you should rest," Delia interjected, concern evident in her voice. "I will rest when this town is not on the verge of losing everything to that vulture Vance," Michael muttered, though he allowed his daughter to bring him a glass of water. Patrick's jaw tightened at the mention of Silas Vance. The man had approached him twice already about the livery stable, offering to buy the mortgage that Ezra had taken out years ago to expand the stalls, a debt that Patrick had been slowly paying down but that still hung over him like a storm cloud that refused to break. "He has approached me as well," Patrick admitted. "About the stable." Michael's eyes met his, a moment of understanding passing between them, two men who understood exactly what predatory patience looked like when wielded by someone with more money and fewer scruples than the town could withstand. "He wants it all," Michael said quietly. "Every business, every parcel of land with water on it. Then he will either sell it off to the railroad at triple the price, or worse, hold this whole town hostage to whatever price he decides to charge for water and goods." "Can he do that?" Delia asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "He already owns the bank, Delia. He already controls who gets loans and who does not. It is only a matter of time before he owns everything else." That evening, as Patrick walked Delia home after she had stayed late at the store balancing accounts, the weight of her father's words seemed to settle over both of them like a physical burden. "There must be something that can be done," Delia said, more to herself than to Patrick, as they walked beneath a sky painted with the last orange remnants of sunset. "I do not know what," Patrick admitted. "Vance has money and lawyers, we have neither." "We have the town," Delia countered. "People who have lived here their whole lives, who built everything with their own hands." Patrick glanced at her, struck again by the fire that seemed to burn beneath her practical exterior. "You sound like you have a plan already forming." "Not yet," Delia said, a small smile playing at her lips, "but give me time." They had reached the small house behind the Callahan store, modest but well kept, with Tommy's silhouette visible in the window as he practiced his letters by lamplight, something Delia insisted upon despite the demands of the store. "Thank you for walking me home, Mr. Morgan." "Patrick," he corrected gently. "Please." "Patrick, then." She said his name as though testing its weight and found she liked the sound of it on her tongue. "Perhaps you might join us for supper on Sunday. Papa speaks highly of your father, and I think he would enjoy the company." Patrick's heart, which had grown accustomed to solitude, stumbled slightly at the invitation. "I would like that very much, Miss Callahan." "Delia," she corrected in turn, and the smile they shared in the gathering darkness held a promise neither was quite ready to name. That Sunday supper became the first of many, as spring gave way to the harder heat of a Texas summer. Patrick found himself increasingly drawn into the Callahan household, helping Tommy with his reading, listening to Michael's stories of Barren Creek's early days, when the land had first been settled by families fleeing the aftermath of the war, staying late into the evening talking with Delia on the porch about everything and nothing, the way young people in love often do before they have found the courage to name what they feel. It was Tommy in his 14-year-old bluntness who first spoke the truth that Patrick and Delia had been carefully avoiding. "You are sweet on my sister," Tommy announced one afternoon in June, finding Patrick at the livery mending a saddle strap, Patrick's hands stilled on the leather. "That is not a proper thing to say, Tommy." "Well, it is true, is it not? You look at her like she hung the moon." "Your sister is a fine woman," Patrick said carefully, "and a good friend to me." Tommy rolled his eyes with the particular scorn only a younger sibling can muster. "You are both foolish if you think anyone in this town has not noticed, even old Mrs. Pemberton at the church has taken to asking when the wedding will be." Patrick felt heat rise in his cheeks, embarrassed at being so transparent, but also something else, a small flame of hope that perhaps what he felt for Delia was not simply a foolish dream born of an orphan's loneliness, but something that might actually be possible, might actually be returned. That evening, as he walked Delia home from the store, the summer air thick with the scent of dust and distant rain that never seemed to fall, Patrick found himself speaking before he had fully decided to. "Delia, I need to say something, and I hope you will forgive me if I say it poorly, as I have never had much practice with such things." Delia stopped walking, turning to face him fully, her heart suddenly loud in her own ears. "You may say anything to me, Patrick. I care for you, more than a friend cares for another friend. I have cared for you since that first morning you came to the stable about your father's mare, and every day since has only made that caring grow into something I no longer know how to contain." The words hung in the warm evening air between them, and for a moment Patrick feared he had misjudged everything, had ruined the fragile friendship they had built. But then Delia's face broke into a smile so genuine, so relieved, that it took his breath away. "I have felt the same," she admitted, "though I confess I did not think an orphan boy from the stable would ever look twice at me." "You are the finest woman in Barren Creek," Patrick said fiercely. "Any man would be a fool not to see it." "And you are the finest man," Delia countered, "orphan or not, perhaps especially because of it. You have made something of yourself with nothing but your own 2 hands and Ezra's kindness." Patrick reached out, hesitant, and took her hand in his, feeling the roughness of years of labor matched against the roughness of her own hardworking palms. "May I call on you properly then, not just as a friend of your father's but as a man who hopes to court you?" "Yes," Delia breathed, joy overwhelming the worry that had become such a constant companion these past months. "Yes, Patrick Morgan, you may." Their first kiss came a week later, beneath the shade of the old oak tree that stood at the edge of town near the small cemetery where Delia's mother was buried. A kiss that was gentle and searching, full of the promise of a future neither had quite dared to imagine before now. But even as their love blossomed through that summer of 1879, the shadow of Silas Vance grew longer over Barren Creek. He had succeeded in foreclosing on the Pemberton farm, forcing the elderly couple to move in with their daughter 3 towns over. He had raised the water rights fees twice, squeezing every rancher and farmer who depended on the creek that gave the town its name. And he had set his sights, with increasing determination, on both the Callahan store and Patrick's livery stable. The confrontation that changed everything came on a hot afternoon in late July, when Silas Vance himself walked into the Callahan store, his fine Eastern suit incongruous against the dusty shelves of flour sacks and farm tools. "Mr. Callahan," Vance said, his voice smooth as oil, "I have come to discuss your outstanding debts." Michael, who had been having a rare good day, straightened in his chair behind the counter. "I am current on my payments, Mr. Vance. There is nothing to discuss." "Ah, but circumstances change, do they not? The bank has decided to call in all outstanding loans immediately, given the uncertain economic climate." "You mean the economic climate you have created," Delia said sharply, stepping out from the back room where she had been taking inventory. Vance's cold eyes settled on her with an appraising look that made her skin crawl. "Miss Callahan, always so spirited. It is a shame such fire will not be enough to save this store." "We will find the money," Michael said, though his voice betrayed uncertainty. "We have 30 days per the terms." "You had 30 days," Vance corrected. The bank's board, myself included, has decided to accelerate the timeline given recent irregularities in the town's economy. You have 1 week to produce the full amount owed, or the store becomes property of the bank." "That is robbery," Delia said, her voice trembling with rage. "Plain and simple robbery. It is business, Miss Callahan, something you would do well to understand if you hope to survive in this world." Vance placed a paper on the counter, official-looking with the bank's seal, before turning and walking out with the confident stride of a man who had already won. Michael stared at the paper, his weathered hands trembling as he picked it up. $200. We do not have half that." "Papa, we will find a way," Delia said, though her own hands shook as she took the paper from him to read the terms herself. That evening, Patrick arrived to find Delia sitting alone on the porch, tears tracking silently down her cheeks in the fading light. He rushed to her side, his heart clenching at her distress. "Delia, what has happened?" She told him everything, her voice breaking as she recounted Vance's visit, the impossible deadline, the very real possibility that her family would lose the store that had been in their family for 2 generations, that had been her mother's pride, that represented everything her father had worked to build. "There must be a way to fight this," Patrick said, his own anger rising on her behalf. "This cannot be legal." "Legal or not, he has the bank behind him, and the bank has the law behind it, at least on paper." Delia wiped at her eyes, frustrated with her own tears. "I am sorry, I did not mean to burden you with this." "You are not a burden," Patrick said fiercely, taking her hands in his. "Delia, listen to me. I have some savings from the stable. It is not much, perhaps $40, but it is something." "I cannot ask that of you, Patrick. It is your livelihood." "You are not asking, I am offering. Because I love you, Delia Callahan, and I will not stand by while that man destroys everything you and your family have built." The declaration of love, spoken in the heat of the moment in the midst of crisis, took them both by surprise. Delia looked up at him, searching his face in the growing darkness. "You love me. I have loved you for months now, though I have been too much of a coward to say it plainly until this moment. I love you too, Patrick. I have for longer than I have admitted even to myself." They kissed then, a kiss deepened by desperation and hope intermingled, a promise that whatever came, they would face it together. But even as they held each other, the practical problem remained. $40, even added to whatever meager savings the Callahans possessed, would not be enough to satisfy the debt Vance had manufactured. It was Tommy, listening from just inside the doorway where he had been supposedly doing his evening chores, who spoke up with the simple clarity of youth. "What if the whole town helped? Everyone owes something to Vance, or knows someone who does. What if we all worked together instead of each family trying to solve this alone?" Delia and Patrick exchanged a look, the idea taking root between them with startling speed. "Tommy might be onto something," Patrick said slowly. "If every family who has been wronged by Vance's practices came together, pooled what resources they have. It would not just save the store," Delia finished, understanding blooming in her expression. "It could break his hold on the entire town." That night marked the beginning of what would later be remembered in Barren Creek as the turning point, though at the time it felt simply like desperate people grasping at whatever hope remained. Patrick and Delia spent the following days visiting every family in town who had suffered under Vance's increasingly predatory practices. From the Hendricks family, whose ranch had lost half its cattle to drought, while Vance raised their water fees, to old Doc Weathers, whose medical practice had been threatened. When Vance called in a loan the doctor had taken to build his small clinic. The gathering they organized took place in the church hall on a Thursday evening. Nearly 50 people crowded into the space meant for perhaps 30, the air thick with anxiety and the particular desperation of people who had watched their livelihoods threatened one by one, each family thinking they suffered alone, until they realized how many others shared their plight. Patrick stood at the front of the hall, more nervous than he had ever been shoeing the wildest horse, but Delia stood beside him, her hand finding his for a brief, steadying squeeze before he began to speak. "Most of you know me as Ezra's boy, the one who grew up in the stable," Patrick began, his voice finding steadiness as he continued. "You know I have no family name to speak of, no inheritance beyond what Ezra left me, which, as most of you know, comes with its own debts attached." A murmur of understanding rippled through the crowd. "But I have lived in this town my whole life. I have watched it grow, watched families like yours build something out of nothing in this hard country. And I have watched, this past year, as one man has systematically taken that away from us, family by family, debt by manufactured debt. What can we do about it?" called out Hank Hendricks from the back. "Vance has the bank, the law, everything on his side. He has money," Delia said, stepping forward to stand beside Patrick. "But he does not have us. He does not have this town, not really, not the way we have each other." "What are you proposing, Miss Callahan?" asked Doc Weathers. "A fund," Delia said. "One that every family contributes to based on what they can afford, no matter how small. We use it to help whoever is facing the most immediate threat from Vance's schemes. My family needs $200 by next week or we lose the store. If everyone here contributes even a few dollars, we might reach that amount." "And what happens next week, when someone else faces the same threat?" asked Mrs. Pemberton's daughter, who had traveled back to town to help with the family's situation. "We cannot keep pooling money forever." "No," Patrick agreed. "Which is why we also need to address the root of the problem. Vance controls the bank, but he does not control the town charter. Barren Creek has never had a proper town council, not since old Mayor Whitfield died 5 years back. If we organize, elect proper representation, we might be able to challenge some of these lending practices legally, bring in a lawyer from Fort Worth if needed." The discussion that followed lasted well into the night, plans forming and reforming as the assembled townspeople argued, debated, and gradually found common purpose. By the time the gathering ended, they had collected pledges totaling nearly $300, enough not only to save the Callahan store, but to provide a small buffer for whatever crisis might come next. More importantly, they had elected a provisional council, with Doc Weathers as temporary mayor and Patrick, somewhat to his own surprise, chosen as a council member representing the town's tradespeople. "They chose you because they trust you," Delia said later that night as they walked home together beneath a sky full of stars, "because you have shown them what it means to give of yourself for others." "I never wanted attention," Patrick admitted. "I have spent my whole life trying to simply survive, to not be a burden." "You are no burden, Patrick Morgan. You are becoming exactly what this town needs." Delia stopped walking, turning to face him with an expression of such open admiration that Patrick felt his chest tighten with emotion. "The orphan boy who slept in the stable is going to help save this whole town. I believe that with everything in me." The following week brought the payment deadline for the Callahan store's debt, and with the town's collective funds, Michael Callahan walked into the bank with the full $200, watching with grim satisfaction as Vance's smug expression faltered upon accepting payment. He had clearly not expected to be met. But Vance was not a man to accept defeat easily. Within days, rumors began circulating that he was pursuing other avenues to tighten his grip on the town, including a plan to buy up water rights to the creek itself from a technical loophole in the original town charter, which would allow him to charge every business and household in Barren Creek for access to water that had previously been considered common property. It was Patrick, using knowledge gained from years of dealing with legal documents related to the stable's mortgage, who discovered the potential flaw in Vance's plan. The original charter, drafted when the town was first established in 1856, specified that water rights belonged collectively to property owners within the town limits, a provision that predated Texas statehood and had never been properly amended, despite Vance's lawyers apparently believing otherwise. "If this is true," Doc Weathers said, examining the documents Patrick had gathered from the county courthouse in the neighboring town of Millbrook. Vance has no legal claim to the water rights at all. He has been operating under a fraudulent understanding of the charter. Or he knows exactly what the charter says and is betting that none of us would think to check, Patrick countered. The council decided to send a delegation to Millbrook to consult with a lawyer, a journey that Patrick and Delia undertook together, along with Doc Weathers, in early August. The 2-day journey by wagon gave them time alone together that their courtship in Barren Creek, always under the watchful eyes of the town, had not previously allowed. They camped the first night beside a small stream, the stars overhead brighter than either had ever noticed before, away from the lamplight of town. Doc Weathers, sensing the young couple's need for privacy, had tactfully settled some distance away, ostensibly to better hear if any wildlife approached, though both Patrick and Delia suspected his true motives were more romantic than practical. "Do you ever wonder about your real parents?" Delia asked, as they sat close together beside the small campfire, the question emerging from a comfortable silence that had settled between them. Patrick was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I used to, when I was younger. I would imagine all sorts of stories, that my mother was a fine lady who had been forced to give me up, that my father was perhaps a soldier who died before I was born, honorable stories that made the abandonment feel less like abandonment. And now I think it does not matter much. Whatever happened, whatever led to me being left in that stable, it brought me to Ezra, and Ezra, whatever his faults, gave me a home, a trade, a way to survive. And it brought me to this town, to you." He reached over, tucking a strand of hair that had escaped her bonnet behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I cannot regret a path that led me to loving you, Delia, whatever hardships came before. I think," Delia said softly, "that whoever your parents were, they would be proud of the man you have become. Proud that, despite everything, you grew into someone who fights for others, who leads with kindness even when the world gave you every reason to be bitter." Patrick's throat tightened with emotion he had rarely allowed himself to feel about his origins. "Sometimes I think Ezra was more of a father than any blood relation could have been. He never spoke much about feelings, was not that kind of man, but he showed me through his actions what it meant to be honest, to work hard, to treat every creature, human or animal, with basic dignity. Those are the values that make you who you are now," Delia said. "The man this town has come to depend on." They shared a kiss beneath the stars that night, gentle and full of unspoken promises, before eventually joining Doc Weathers around the main campfire to share the last of their supper and discuss strategy for the meeting with the lawyer the following day. The lawyer, a sharp-minded woman named Constance Baker, who had studied law despite the significant obstacles facing women in the profession, confirmed what Patrick had suspected. The original town charter indeed protected water rights as common property, a fact that Vance's lawyers had either overlooked or deliberately misrepresented in their attempts to claim exclusive control. "This is quite clear," Ms. Baker said, reviewing the documents with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Vance has no legal standing to charge fees for water access under the current charter. If he has already collected such fees, your town may have grounds to demand restitution. Can you help us present this case, should Vance attempt to challenge our understanding?" Doc Weathers asked. "I would be honored to represent Barren Creek's interests," Ms. Baker replied. "Predatory practices like the ones you describe are unfortunately common as the railroad expands westward, with men like Vance seeing opportunity in the vulnerability of established communities. It would be my pleasure to see justice served." Armed with legal backing and a clear understanding of their rights, Patrick, Delia, and Doc Weathers returned to Barren Creek with renewed purpose. The confrontation with Vance, when it came, took place at a town meeting in late August, with nearly the entire population of Barren Creek crowded into the largest available space, the town's small church. Silas Vance arrived with 2 lawyers of his own, clearly expecting to overwhelm the town's resistance with legal complexity and intimidation. What he found instead was a united community, armed with proper documentation, and the confidence that came from knowing the law actually stood on their side. "Mr. Vance," Doc Weathers began, standing before the assembled crowd with the authority of his newly appointed position, "we have discovered significant discrepancies in your recent claims regarding water rights in Barren Creek." Vance's expression remained impassive, though Patrick, watching closely, noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. "I am not certain what you mean, Dr. Weathers. My lawyers have reviewed all relevant documentation." Then perhaps they neglected to consult the original town charter, dated 1856, which clearly establishes water rights as collective property belonging to all landowners within the town limits, not subject to private ownership or fee structures imposed by any individual or institution. Ms. Baker, who had traveled with them from Millbrook specifically for this confrontation, stepped forward with the relevant documents. "I have here certified copies of the original charter, along with legal opinion confirming that any fees collected for water access under your directive constitute fraudulent collection and may be subject to legal action for restitution." Vance's lawyers exchanged uneasy glances, quickly reviewing the documents Ms. Baker presented. The murmur that swept through the crowd carried a rising tide of vindication and anger, 6 months of accumulated grievances finding voice in the reality that their suffering had been, at least in part, based on illegitimate claims. "This is a minor technical matter," Vance said, though his confident tone had begun to waver. "Easily remedied through proper legal channels." "The proper legal channel," Patrick said, stepping forward for the first time in the confrontation, "would be for you to immediately cease collection of illegitimate water fees and provide restitution to every family who has been wrongfully charged. Additionally, we have documented evidence of accelerated loan calls without proper notice, in violation of standard banking practices." "And who are you to speak of proper practices?" Vance sneered, his composure finally cracking under the weight of unified opposition. "A stable boy with delusions of importance." The crowd's reaction was immediate and fierce, several voices rising in Patrick's defense, but it was Delia who stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise with clear authority. "This man," she said, gesturing to Patrick, "has done more for this town in the past 2 months than you have ever done except take from it. He organized the very citizens you tried to divide and conquer. He found the legal evidence that exposes your fraud. And he has done it all while asking for nothing in return except the chance to see this town thrive as it should." The crowd's murmur turned to applause, and Vance, recognizing the shift in power that had occurred, attempted one final gambit. "Perhaps we can discuss more reasonable terms," he said, addressing Doc Weathers directly. "A revised fee structure more favorable to the town's interests. There will be no fee structure for water rights that rightfully belong to this community," Doc Weathers replied firmly. "Furthermore, given the evidence of fraudulent practices, this council has voted to demand your resignation from the bank's board, effective immediately, along with full restitution of all improperly collected fees." Vance's face reddened with barely contained fury, but surrounded by 50 determined citizens and facing clear legal evidence against him, he had little recourse but to comply, at least outwardly. He left Barren Creek that same week, though not before attempting several petty acts of retaliation, including trying to convince the railroad company to reroute their planned spur line away from the town. This final threat, however, backfired spectacularly when Patrick, drawing on connections he had made through years of providing horses and wagon repair for railroad surveyors passing through, personally traveled to Fort Worth to speak with railroad officials, presenting them with evidence of the town's newly stabilized governance and economic recovery efforts. "Barren Creek is a town worth investing in," Patrick told the railroad executives, his natural earnestness proving more persuasive than Vance's attempted manipulation. "We have overcome corruption and united around fair business practices. We would welcome the opportunity that a railroad connection would provide, and we would ensure fair treatment for all businesses that choose to operate within our town limits." The railroad officials, impressed by both Patrick's straightforward manner and the documentation of Barren Creek's economic recovery, agreed to proceed with the original spur line plans, effectively ending any influence Vance might have retained over the town's future. By September of 1879, Barren Creek had transformed from a town on the verge of ruin into a community rebuilding itself with renewed purpose and unity. The Callahan store thrived once more. Patrick's livery stable saw increased business from the railroad construction crews, and the town council, with Doc Weathers as elected mayor and Patrick as an increasingly respected voice among the tradespeople, worked to establish fair practices that would prevent any future predator from exploiting the community's vulnerabilities. It was during this period of renewal that Patrick finally worked up the courage to speak with Michael Callahan about his intentions toward Delia. He found the older man sitting on the store's porch one evening, enjoying the relative cool of early autumn after the day's heat had finally broken. "Mr. Callahan, I would like to speak with you about something important." Michael, whose health had improved somewhat with the reduced stress of the town's crisis resolution, gestured for Patrick to take the seat beside him. "I suspect I know what you wish to discuss, young man." "I love your daughter," Patrick said simply, deciding directness suited the moment better than elaborate preamble. "I have loved her for months now, and I believe she feels the same for me. I would like your blessing to ask for her hand in marriage." Michael studied Patrick for a long moment, his weathered face revealing little of his thoughts. "You have no family name, no inheritance beyond a stable with debts still attached, though I understand those debts are being managed responsibly." "That is true, sir. I can offer Delia nothing but my honest labor, my devotion, and whatever future we might build together through hard work." "You have also," Michael continued, "organized this entire town to fight against corruption that threatened to destroy everything we built. You have shown wisdom beyond your years, courage in the face of intimidation, and a heart generous enough to risk your own livelihood for others." Patrick waited, uncertain where the older man's words were leading. "I have watched you with my daughter these past months," Michael said finally. "I have seen how you look at her, how you treat her with respect even when discussing difficult matters, how you have supported her dreams rather than trying to diminish them. Ezra would be proud of the man you have become, Patrick Morgan, and I would be honored to call you son." The relief and joy that flooded through Patrick at these words left him momentarily speechless. "Thank you, sir. I promise I will spend every day making certain Delia never regrets choosing me." "See that you do," Michael said, though a smile softened his gruff tone. "Now, I believe my daughter is inside, likely wondering what has kept you from joining us for supper. Perhaps you should ask her the question you actually came here to discuss with her father." Patrick found Delia in the kitchen, helping prepare the evening meal while Tommy set the table with the particular clumsiness of a teenage boy more interested in the conversation happening than the task at hand. "Delia," Patrick said, and something in his tone made her turn immediately, noting the nervous energy that seemed to radiate from him. "Patrick, is everything all right?" "Everything is more than all right." He took her hands in his, ignoring Tommy's obvious eavesdropping and Michael's presence in the doorway behind him. "Delia Callahan, from the moment you walked into that stable asking about your father's mare, you have brought light into a life that had known mostly darkness and struggle. You have shown me what it means to fight for something beyond mere survival, to believe in love and partnership and building a future together." Delia's eyes filled with tears as she began to understand what was happening, her heart racing with anticipation. "I have no grand estate to offer you, no family name that carries weight or history. But I have a stable that is slowly becoming profitable, hands willing to work as hard as necessary to provide for a family, and a heart that beats only for you. Delia, will you marry me? Yes, Delia breathed, joy overwhelming any need for elaborate response. Yes, Patrick Morgan, 1,000 times yes. The wedding took place in October, on a day when the Texas sky stretched clear and blue overhead, the harsh summer heat finally giving way to the gentler warmth of autumn. The entire town of Barren Creek attended, filling the church and spilling out into the surrounding grounds, a testament to how thoroughly Patrick and Delia's story had become intertwined with the town's own narrative of resilience and renewal. Doc Weathers, in his role as mayor, gave a brief speech before the ceremony began, speaking of how the town had nearly lost everything to greed and corruption, and how it had been saved not through violence or dramatic confrontation, but through unity, legal wisdom, and the simple courage of ordinary people standing together against injustice. Patrick Morgan came to us with nothing, Doc Weathers said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. An orphan raised in a stable, with no family name, no inheritance, no claim to importance beyond his own character. Yet it was that very character, forged through hardship into strength and compassion, that helped save us all. Today, we celebrate not just a marriage, but the triumph of decency over greed, of community over isolation, of love over the calculations of men like Silas Vance who see only profit where the rest of us see neighbors and friends. The ceremony itself was simple but deeply moving. Delia in a dress her mother had worn at her own wedding, carefully altered and repaired for the occasion. Patrick in his best suit, purchased with money saved specifically for this purpose. As they exchanged vows before the assembled community, promising to love and support each other through whatever challenges the future might bring, few in attendance could hold back tears, moved by the genuine devotion evident between the young couple. Michael Callahan, standing to give his daughter away, whispered words of blessing that only Delia could hear. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you have become, and so grateful for the man who will now share your life. Tommy served as Patrick's best man, having grown close to the older man during the months of courtship and crisis, viewing him almost as an older brother he had never had. His speech during the reception, held afterward in the church hall where the fateful town meeting had taken place months earlier, brought both laughter and tears. Patrick taught me that family is not just about blood, Tommy said, his young voice carrying surprising maturity. He showed me what it means to fight for the people you love, to work hard without complaint, and to always treat others with respect regardless of their circumstances. I am proud to call him my brother. The reception continued late into the evening, with music provided by local musicians who had brought their fiddles and guitars, dancing that spilled out under the stars once the hall grew too warm, and food contributed by nearly every family in town, a testament to the community bonds that had strengthened through their shared struggle against Vance's schemes. As the celebration wound down and guests began departing for their homes, Patrick and Delia found a quiet moment alone on the church steps, watching the last of the lanterns being extinguished as families made their way home through the cool October night. Can you believe this is our life now? Delia asked, leaning against her new husband, her head resting on his shoulder. I spent so many years believing I would always be alone, Patrick admitted, that my beginnings had somehow marked me as unworthy of the kind of love and belonging that other people seem to take for granted. You changed that, Delia. You saw past where I started to who I could become. You changed yourself, Patrick. I merely had the good fortune to fall in love with the man you were already becoming. She turned to face him fully, moonlight illuminating the joy evident in her features. The orphan boy who slept in the stable grew up to help save this whole town, and along the way, he saved my heart as well. They kissed then, sealed by moonlight and the promise of a shared future, before walking hand in hand toward the small house that Patrick had spent the past months preparing, adjacent to the livery stable that had once been his only home, now transformed into something more, a foundation for the family they would build together. The following years brought both challenges and joys typical of frontier life, though the united spirit that had saved Barren Creek from Vance's corruption continued to strengthen the town's resilience. The railroad spur was completed in 1880, bringing new prosperity and growth to Barren Creek, with Patrick's livery stable expanding to serve the increased traffic of travelers and settlers moving through on their way further west. Delia continued managing the Callahan store, now renamed Callahan and Morgan Mercantile to reflect the family partnership, while also taking on an increasingly important role in the town's governance, becoming the first woman elected to serve on Barren Creek's town council in 1881, a position she used to advocate for fair business practices and support for struggling families, ensuring that no one in their community would ever again face the kind of exploitation Vance had attempted. Their first child, a son they named Ezra Michael Morgan in honor of both the man who had raised Patrick and Delia's father, arrived in the spring of 1881, born during a particularly harsh dust storm that seemed determined to test the young family's resilience from the very beginning. Patrick, though nervous beyond measure during the long hours of Delia's labor, found himself surprisingly calm when finally holding his newborn son, tears streaming down his weathered face as he studied features that held echoes of both himself and his beloved wife. "He has your eyes," Delia said weakly, but happily from the bed where Doc Weathers' wife, who had trained as a midwife, was helping her recover from the delivery. "And your stubborn chin," Patrick replied, earning a tired laugh from his exhausted wife. Young Ezra grew quickly, followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Sarah, after Delia's mother, and then 3 years after that by another son, William, named for no particular relation, but simply because Patrick and Delia both liked the strength the name carried. Michael Callahan lived long enough to see all 3 grandchildren born, his health stabilizing significantly once free from the constant stress that Vance's schemes had caused, finally passing peacefully in his sleep in 1887, surrounded by family who loved him deeply. Tommy, who had grown into a capable young man under Patrick's mentorship, eventually took over management of the mercantile store as Delia's council responsibilities increased, marrying a young schoolteacher named Rebecca, who had come to Barren Creek in 1883 to establish the town's first proper schoolhouse, another initiative that Delia had championed during her time on the council. The livery stable, meanwhile, continued to grow under Patrick's careful management, eventually expanding to include a small blacksmith operation and wagon repair shop that served not just Barren Creek but travelers throughout the region. Patrick never forgot his origins, however, and made it a point to always offer work and shelter to any young person who found themselves without family or resources, much as Ezra had once done for him. One such young man, a boy named Jacob who arrived in Barren Creek in 1885, having fled an abusive situation in a neighboring territory, found himself taken in by Patrick and Delia much as Patrick himself had once been taken in by Ezra. Jacob eventually became like a member of the family, learning the trade of horseshoeing and stable management from Patrick while also receiving education from Delia and eventually from Tommy's wife Rebecca at the schoolhouse. "You are paying forward what Ezra gave you," Delia observed one evening, watching Patrick patiently teach young Jacob how to properly examine a horse's hoof for problems. "Ezra never asked for anything in return for what he gave me," Patrick replied. "The least I can do is offer the same kindness to others who need it." By 1890, Barren Creek had grown from the struggling town of 600 that Patrick and Delia had helped save from Vance's corruption into a thriving community of nearly 2,000 residents, supported by the railroad connection, diverse businesses, and the kind of fair governance that Doc Weathers, Delia, and eventually Patrick himself, who joined the council in 1888, had worked to establish and maintain. Silas Vance, they later learned through occasional news that filtered through from the east, had attempted similar schemes in several other towns throughout Texas and beyond, though his reputation eventually caught up with him, leading to legal troubles that effectively ended his career as a predatory financier by the mid-1880s. Whether he ever felt remorse for his attempted destruction of Barren Creek remained unknown, but the town's continued prosperity stood as its own testament to the triumph of community and justice over individual greed. As their children grew, Patrick and Delia made certain to share the story of Barren Creek's near destruction and eventual salvation, teaching Ezra, Sarah, and William the importance of standing up against injustice, of caring for one's neighbors, and of the power that ordinary people held when they chose unity over isolation. "Your father grew up with nothing," Delia would tell their children during quiet evening conversations. "No family, no name, no inheritance beyond what kindness others chose to show him. Yet he grew into a man who helped save this entire town, who showed everyone what true leadership looks like, built not on wealth or status but on character and compassion." "And your mother," Patrick would add, "refused to accept that injustice was simply the way of the world. She organized this whole town, found the legal knowledge we needed, and showed everyone that a woman's voice and wisdom were just as valuable as any man's in solving our community's problems." Their love story became something of local legend in Barren Creek, told and retold as the town continued to grow and prosper into the new century. Young couples courting would sometimes walk beneath the old oak tree near the cemetery where Patrick and Delia had shared their first kiss, now marked with a small plaque the town council had installed to commemorate the spot as part of the town's history. In 1895, on the occasion of their 16th wedding anniversary, Patrick and Delia stood once again on the church steps where they had shared that quiet moment after their wedding reception so many years before. Their children, now teenagers themselves, along with Jacob, who had grown into a respected young man managing his own small section of the stable business, gathered around them for a photograph, one of the first the town's newly established photography studio had taken. "Do you ever regret it?" Delia asked her husband, as they posed for the photograph that would later hang prominently in their home. "Choosing to fight for this town, when we might have simply focused on our own survival." Patrick considered the question seriously, as he considered most things, before answering with the quiet certainty that had become his trademark over the years. "I regret nothing, Delia. Every challenge we faced, every fight we fought together, brought us closer, showed me exactly what kind of woman I had been fortunate enough to marry, exactly what kind of family we could build together. This town, our children, the life we have created, it is more than I ever dared to dream possible for an orphan boy who once thought himself unworthy of love or belonging." "You were always worthy," Delia said softly, squeezing his hand. "You simply needed someone to show you that truth." "And you were always brave enough to fight for what mattered," Patrick replied. "You simply needed a partner who believed in that fight as much as you did." Their eldest son, Ezra, now 14 and showing signs of the same steady character that had defined his father, would eventually take over management of the expanded livery and blacksmith operation, while Sarah, following in her mother's footsteps, showed early interest in eventually serving on the town council herself, determined to continue the tradition of fair governance her parents had helped establish. William, the youngest, developed a fascination with the railroad that had transformed their town's fortunes, eventually pursuing a career as a railroad engineer that would take him to help connect other struggling communities throughout Texas to the growing rail network. As the 19th century drew toward its close, Barren Creek stood as a testament to what community, love, and determined resistance to corruption could accomplish. The stable where Patrick had once slept as an abandoned infant had grown into a thriving business complex. The small dry goods store Delia had helped manage through crisis had expanded into a proper mercantile serving the whole region. And the love between them had grown from tentative courtship through shared crisis into a partnership that had helped shape not just their own family's future, but the future of an entire community. On a warm evening in the spring of 1899, 20 years after their wedding, Patrick and Delia sat together on the porch of the home they had built and expanded over the decades, watching their grandchildren, Ezra's own children now, playing in the yard as the sun set golden over the Texas landscape that had once seemed so threatening in its harshness, but had gradually become simply home. "We built something good here," Delia said, her voice carrying the contentment of a life well lived, challenges met and overcome through partnership and love. "We did," Patrick agreed, wrapping his arm around his wife's shoulders, still finding comfort and joy in her presence after all these years together. "Ezra would be proud, I think, to see what became of that abandoned baby he found in the stable that night. He would be proud of the man you chose to become," Delia corrected gently. "The circumstances of your birth never defined you, Patrick. Your choices did, your character, your willingness to fight for others even when you had every reason to focus only on your own survival. And your choice to see past those circumstances," Patrick added, "to look at an orphan stable boy and see someone worthy of love, of partnership, of building a life together." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their grandchildren's laughter fill the evening air, the town of Barren Creek spread out before them, prosperous and secure, a living testament to the love story that had helped save it from ruin 2 decades before. The orphan boy who once slept alone in a stable, with no name, no family, no claim to any future beyond mere survival, had grown into a man whose love and courage had helped transform an entire town's destiny. And Delia Callahan, the determined young woman who had refused to accept injustice as inevitable, had found in that same orphan boy not just a husband, but a true partner in building something lasting and meaningful from the ashes of near destruction. Their story, passed down through generations of Morgans and Callahans who would continue to call Barren Creek home, became a permanent part of the town's history, taught to schoolchildren, alongside lessons about the dangers of unchecked greed and the power of community unity. The plaque beneath the old oak tree remained, weathered by decades of Texas seasons but still legible, marking the spot where 2 young people had first dared to imagine a future together, a future that had ultimately helped save an entire town from the ruin that had once seemed inevitable. As night fell fully over Barren Creek that spring evening in 1899, Patrick Morgan and Delia Callahan Morgan remained on their porch, hand in hand, grateful for the love that had sustained them through every challenge, grateful for the family they had built together, and grateful for the community that had taught them both that even the most difficult beginnings could lead to the most beautiful of futures, provided one had the courage to fight for love, for justice, and for the belief that ordinary people, united in purpose, could overcome even the greatest of obstacles. The stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss beneath the old oak tree, the same stars that had guided their journey to Millbrook and back, the same stars that continued to watch over the town they had helped save, now thriving proof that love, courage, and unwavering commitment to justice could indeed transform not just 2 individual lives, but the destiny of an entire community. In the years that followed, their children and grandchildren would continue the legacy of service and commitment to Barren Creek that Patrick and Delia had established, ensuring that the town would never again face the kind of predatory exploitation that had once threatened its very existence. And through it all, the love between the orphan boy who had once slept in the stable and the determined young woman who had seen his true worth remained the beating heart of a story that would be remembered and celebrated for generations to come, a true testament to the power of love to not just sustain 2 hearts, but to save an entire town from ruin.